Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. They were 4 Americans with a borrowed boat, borrowed courage, and a belief that the world would make room for their ambition. In June of 2007, filmmaker Daniel Carter, 32, set off with his girlfriend, nurse Hannah Price, photographer Eric Lawson, and anthropology grad student Melissa Green to document an untouched corner of the Western Amazon. They recorded, themselves promising a film that would challenge myths about the jungle. What they delivered, unintentionally, was a chain of evidence that ends at the edge of a clearing no one else has found since. The official file calls it a disappearance. The locals call it a warning. Between the lines sits a word everyone denies and everyone believes: cannibals. This is a reconstruction based on interviews, recovered journals, satellite data, and the few minutes of video that survived humidity, time, and whatever came form. Them in that forest. Where we can't be certain, we'll say so. Where the record is harsh, we won't look away. And where this becomes legend, we'll note the seam. Daniel Carter grew up in Oregon staring at maps, filling notebook margins with routes he couldn't afford to take. After a string of short documentaries that did well on the festival circuit, but never paid, he decided to aim bigger. He pitched his 3 friends on something he framed as noble: a portrait of the Amazon beyond stereotypes. People think the rainforest is either a pharmacy or a horror movie, he told a friend weeks before they left. It's a home, it's complicated, we'll show that. Hannah Price was the ballast. 29, she'd done disaster relief in Louisiana and rural medicine in Colorado. She saw the trip as adventure with a purpose, basic clinics along. The river for communities that welcomed them, bandages for fishermen with machete cuts, antibiotics for fevers that kept kids out of school. In private messages later recovered from her laptop, she confided a more personal reason. She wanted to see who Daniel was outside of Portland hustle, away from girlfriend as crew member and toward girlfriend as partner. Eric Lawson was 30 and often underpaid. He had an eye for the moment before something happened. His photos vibrated with possibility. A hand suspended over a chess piece, waves just as they folded. He craved images no one else had, a fever that makes good photographers, brave and reckless. Melissa Green, 27, had a professor who said the word contact like a wound. She was the ethical compass of the group, the one who insisted on permits and on staying clear of designated territories. She also brought the most important item on the expedition: a small field journal wrapped in orange nylon and sealed in a freezer bag. It, more than any camera, tells us what it felt like to fall off the map. They landed in Brazil in late May, when the air holds heat like a cup and the rivers are swollen. In Manaus, they paid too much for fuel and too little for a used outboard motor. In Atalaia do Norte, they hired a local boatman who agreed to take them as far upriver as he was comfortable. He told me years later that he warned them exactly once, and very clearly. There are regions where the river narrows and the trees lean so close the light looks tired. In those regions, if you are not known, you are not welcome. They nodded, paid, and filmed him tying their gear to the skiff. On June 2nd, the group's GPS pings show them hugging a brown ribbon of water. It's a map that curves, stalls, then pitches into a thicket of blue-green nothing. They stop at tiny places that don't make maps: one-room shops, hand-painted soccer posts, kids running barefoot with plastic bottles tied to strings. They share coffee and canned milk with a man who says he remembers Daniel's laugh. They shoot footage of a woman weaving a basket with vines that leave a green scent on their fingers. Hannah changes dressings for a boy's ankle. Melissa composes questions she never gets to ask anyone twice. By June 5th, they're past where the boatman will go. He drops them at a patch of bank that looks like thoughtless wilderness to outsiders and like an address to anyone born there. He says he'll wait 3 days at a midpoint downstream. They promise to be there sooner. He leaves. The outboard fades to a line and then to memory. The first night in, Melissa writes, "The forest feels participatory. We can't tell if we're intruding or if it's entertaining itself by letting us through." Day 2, they hike along a game trail that denies its name every 20 feet. The canopy eats hours. You can't measure distance by sun when the sun is a suggestion. Daniel insists on filming small things. A leaf shaped like a canoe paddle. Fungus that looks powdered with ash. A stream whose water runs the color of tea. He frames these with missionary zeal. 1,000 tiny rebuttals to movies that paint forests with one color. A fisherman I spoke with remembers a tent on a gravel bar and an American woman offering him a protein bar she hated. He took it, ate the foil by accident later, and laughed, telling me. He says he watched them disappear into green that did not spit them back out in any direction he knows. Day 4. A notation in Melissa's journal. Found a series of poles set into the ground with cords stretched between them. No signage, no words, just an implied barrier. We debated meaning. Daniel said boundary markers in the abstract. I said we should treat them as concrete. We walked around. The forest closed behind us. At night, the language of insects quiets, amplifying whatever else speaks. The group hears what they call whistles. Not birds, Eric insists on camera, pointing the lens at trees that offer no proof. He wakes to footprints near their camp. Bare, small, the toes blunt, the width wider than his. He takes photos with a flash and later deletes them without telling anyone. When his camera is recovered, the deletes are still there. Day 6. The first argument they record. Melissa says they need to turn back to make the rendezvous with the boatman. Daniel says the point is to go somewhere that requires more than a glance. They split the difference by staying another day and promising to cut a new path back. That night, they suspend their food in a bear bag from a branch that doesn't look strong enough. It holds. They feel watched. The word paranoid appears in Hannah's handwriting once, then not again. Day 7. Eric twists his ankle in mud he thought was ground. It's minor. They tape it and he becomes the slowest, shooting last in line. Filming backs, filming shadows he will later caption as suggestions. Day 8. They find what Daniel calls a shrine, and Melissa refuses to step into frame. Bones strung with vines, polished by touch. Feathers, a charm made of wood and shells. "This is not for us," she says. Daniel argues that observation is not theft. Hannah says that the polite thing is to leave something and to take nothing. She leaves a red hair tie at the edge of what they agree is a circle. Day 9. They begin seeing the same tree twice. The jungle has a way of folding distance. So you think you succeeded until you're back where you started. Hannah notes she hears soft voices at dawn, like people speaking through water. Eric hears them too and writes in the margin, "Not voices, rhythm, intentional." Day 10. Their rendezvous with the boatman has come and gone. The river is somewhere to their right. Melissa's journal has narrower lines for the first time. She's conserving pages. She notes the appearance of totems set lower into the ground. Thick rope made of plant fiber and something else. A drift of ash not from a campfire, carried on wind that should be too thick to carry anything. Day 11. The event known in the file as the vandalism. They return from collecting water to find their tarp slashed in clean lines as if cut by a blade. Hannah's pack is open, then reclosed. Nothing is missing, or everything is, and they don't know it yet. On camera, Daniel says, "We're making contact." Off camera, Melissa says, "No, we have been contacted." Hannah sits cross-legged, fingers dug into the dirt to keep from shaking. Eric cleans his lens like a ritual. Day 12. Their final complete video. It's short. Daniel speaks in a tone he used in his shorts when describing any authority who said no. "We think we're being followed," he says. "We think we should leave." Behind him, Melissa stares at a stand of trees as if she's reading what they intend. Eric half smiles in a way friends say means he was scared. Hannah holds a cross she inherited from her grandmother and taps it against her chest, not like a prayer, but like a rhythm she's trying to remember. Then, motion, camera skewing to ground, a partial image of a foot that is not theirs, then darkness. The video cuts. That night, something happens to them that only Hannah details in her own hand. Her pages have a different pressure, letters scraped as if she wrote while her hands were bound. "They came closer," she writes. "Painted faces. The colors look like night and injury. They move as a group, no random. They took the bag, then put it back. They put their hands in the ashes and touched our faces. I think this means something. I kept saying we are sorry. Melissa kept saying we see you." Daniel made his voice calm, and it was not. Eric said someone's name over and over. His sister's, maybe. "They took us." Not angry, decided. The next recovered lines are soft with moisture, the ink undercut by damp. "They walk us without talking. I think they've been watching long enough that our terror is a detail, not an event. There is a clearing. It is not new. It smells like cooked plant and something like metal. I am sorry for thinking that. I am so sorry to think it." The last line on that page is the start of a prayer she never finished. Every story told by anyone who works along that river hits an edge like this and changes temperature. The search team, assembled by state authorities and volunteers from communities downstream, reached the campsite on June 19th. It looked slept in and curated. No heavy footprints except the group's own until the last day, then prints that tell only that more than one person came and that the forest rearranged itself around that fact. They found the tarp, the slashed lines at once clean and frayed, a wet smudge of pigment on one corner, a color not quite red, not quite brown. They found Melissa's journal in its orange wrap buried shallow, as if tucked there by someone who had watched her pull it close every night and understood its importance. There were no bodies. There was no blood that any of the searchers could see in the way television teaches people to see. There were only stories older than any of this, that deep in the forest live groups who wish not to be met, that among them are practices meant for them and not for cameras, that if you stray into a place with rules you do not know, the rules still apply. Some men said the word cannibal in whispers, a word that glows in the human mind like a lit match dropped in dry brush. Some women said, just as quietly, that the word is a trick, something outsiders carry into other people's homes to explain what they don't understand and to make themselves feel braver when they leave. Official statements avoided the word. The file speaks instead of a hostile or defensive encounter with unknown persons, and an unresolved outcome. The boatman who brought them as far as he dared went back upriver 3 times, bringing food and fuel and hope he dared not say out loud. He returned with nothing each time. Years pass. The river changes course the way a sentence changes meaning when spoken through a different mouth. In 2011, at the edge of a drought that exposed banks usually held underwater, a child playing with a stick found a plastic bag wedged behind roots like a secret. Inside, a bandana, a memory card, 3 pages of paper pressed together by humidity and separated by careful fingers, and what looks like a charm made of wood and shell. The family turned it over to the local police, who turned it over to a regional office where a technician with a gentle touch and a superstition about borrowed tragedies plugged in the card. The files were not fresh. They were fragments that grain and corrosion turned into ghosts. But they were enough to draw a rough map of the last hours that no one wanted to walk, and to breed a new round of arguments about what exactly those hours contained. Audio first. A hiss textured like leaves. Under it, a rhythm that could be drum or could be footfall. then a voice, Daniel's, counting breaths without realizing he'd pressed record. Or perhaps he had. Another voice, low, steady, speaking syllables that don't align easily with Portuguese or Spanish or English. A third voice, Hannah, saying quietly, "We understand," and then repeating, "We don't understand," because both sentences can be true at once. Video next, a sliver of the clearing at an angle that says the camera is at ground level. The lens tries to find light and eats shadow instead. It catches a hint of paint on skin, a pattern of black and brown that looks intentional and ancient. It catches smoke rising with purpose and plantains roasting on a rack, and something else Hannah's journal would not make herself name. There are hands that move with the simplicity of muscle memory. There is a circle drawn in ash, not neat but decisive. Faces enter and leave the frame as if the camera is a small animal they do not find interesting. What follows is a set of images any reporter would be right to resist. They are easy to sensationalize and dangerous to ignore. The footage shows food being set out that is not going to feed 4 hungry outsiders. It shows a group distributing portions the way families do. It shows a gourd passed hand to hand. It shows someone, small, possibly a child, touching a strand of Melissa's hair as if verifying something learned from a story. It shows no violence. That's important. At least, not yet. A final fragment is what rescuers, police, and professors debate in small rooms. A shape just off frame that may be what popular culture wants it to be. Or it is a trick of light, of our watching. The clip ends because memory cards end, or because hands pulled it away. In the absence of the final answer, the story fractures into theories. 1. That the 4 stumbled into a ritual meal in which outsiders have no place, and that they were seized not out of hunger but out of rule. 2. That they were taken in a warning to others because they crossed a boundary marked by poles and cords they chose to ignore. 3. That no ancient group did this at all. That river pirates or traffickers in the region, aware of the power of certain words, staged a scene with stolen objects to push the story toward myth and away from their work. 4. That somewhere deep in there, still, is a community that has set its own edges against a world that insists on dissolving edges, and that in such a community, there are practices meant only for people born to them, misunderstood at the best of times and unforgivable at the worst. When you tell this story, you can feel your audience leaning toward the version with teeth. Cannibals, the word that sells tickets, moves clicks. But anyone who's worked along that river will tell you privately that the word has a history of being deployed by those who want to conquer, to shame, to raid. They'll also tell you that the rainforest doesn't require the word to be frightening. It frightens by scale and by silence, by the way it makes individuals small and choices irreversible, and yet the evidence doesn't let us dismiss the darkest interpretation outright. Hannah's journal writes around a thing she cannot name. The footage shows food whose outline is wrong for comfort. Melissa leaves a note without dates preserved on the edge of a page, a block of text in her compressed handwriting. If anyone finds this, understand that we were treated not with rage, but with certainty. There were rules here. We did not know them. We wanted to meet, not to be met. If there is a way to die that counts as witness, I hope what we did qualifies. I do not want to be a cautionary tale told badly. The ink smears. The next line is a word that could be forgive or forget. The page buckles before the curve of the word completes. What of the men? Daniel, who believed he could translate across any gulf. Eric, who believed images could protect him. Their names sit like stones in the mouths of those who knew them. There are stories from fishermen about hearing shouts turn to chanting, turn to nothing. There are stories about a woman cutting at a rope with a shard of metal and running blind until she hit water, only to be turned back by a current that chose, that night, to argue. Those stories contradict each other in minute ways. In aggregate, they draw a picture of an attempt at escape that did not work. One man says, "They do not run from what they chose," speaking not of the four outsiders but of the other group. Another says, "They did not run because they did not need to." Back in the United States, families waited for the bureaucratic language of "remains recovered." They received instead the indefinite tense of "presumed." Hannah's mother writes emails to an address her daughter will never check, tells her about a long winter, about the neighbor's dog, about how she keeps Hannah's Christmas ornaments in a box she opens in July just to prove she can. Daniel's younger brother refuses interviews and sends, unprompted, a single photo of Daniel at 8 building a fort out of couch cushions and declaring himself explorer of the hallway. Eric's sister keeps his camera on her shelf like an urn that never held anything. Melissa's professor keeps her chair in his seminar open and never explains why to new students. If you want a clean conclusion, the Amazon is a bad vendor. It sells ambiguity by the liter. The last official search, scaled down and then down again, ended with a press conference in a room too bright for what it contained. A man in a suit said that absence is not proof. A woman in a uniform said they would continue to encourage people to respect boundaries, legal and cultural. A local leader spoke softly and, to those who will hear it, said the thing most true. There are places where the forest is not a park. He did not say anything about cannibals. He did not need to. The word had already stalked the room on its own. What we have, then, is a narrative with edges singed by legend. 4 travelers documented their approach to a part of the world that did not ask for them, and on some level warned them not to come. They saw signs, they named them, and then they stepped over. They were observed as surely as they were recording. They were taken, by people or by the place. If there was a ritual, it wasn't built for cameras, regardless of what those cameras caught. If there was a meal that blurred our capacity for empathy, it belonged to a history that is not ours to inventory. If there was murder, it will be the kind that feels like a verdict rather than a crime to those who delivered it. There is, finally, a note in Hannah's journal that doesn't get quoted because it doesn't comfort anyone and doesn't feed advertisements. It's a description of dawn in the clearing written as if she had been allowed to see it more than once. In the early light, she wrote, the paint on their faces looks less like war and more like weather. A boy held a gourd like it was a prize. A woman laughed, and it made me want to laugh too. For a second, I remembered that we are a species that sits down together. She crossed out the last sentence, then rewrote it with one change. We are a species that sits down together before we decide what we must do. The memory card ends where memory does. Mid-gesture. The camera turns. A hand reaches toward it, not to strike, but to take. The world goes dark. After that, the file goes quiet. The jungle keeps the rest. The fishermen keep their stories. The families keep their rituals for people missing but not gone. The boatman keeps going upriver farther than he swore he would. Someone else finds poles in the ground and cords between them and, without knowing why, turns around. People still go. They come with cameras and batteries and a sense that they will be the ones to return with an answer. They forget that the forest is not an answer factory. It is a place with places inside it, each with rules older than the idea of rules. If they step into one that belongs to someone else, they may find what Daniel found when he mistook certainty for permission. An ending that refuses to be edited into anyone's idea of a tidy truth. So if you ask what happened to the 4 Americans captured deep in the Amazon, a reporter keeping faith with honest ambiguity will say they crossed a line. They were taken by people with their own laws. Their fate sits behind a curtain we are not invited to pull. The river moved on. The forest closed. And somewhere, in a place with no name on any map, the story that belongs to those who took them continues unrecorded. There's a village downriver that tells the story differently. In their version, the forest did not take 4 people. It accepted 4 mistakes. In another version, told by a man who sells fuel to every skiff that can afford it, the 4 are alive and chose not to return, seduced by a life without Wi-Fi, or taxes, or shame. In a third, everything we've said is wrong, and the memory card was placed where someone knew a child would find it, to remind the rest of us that the world is bigger than we prefer. The jungle is big enough to hold all 3 at once. The last thing we know for sure is a line from Melissa, tucked on the inside back cover of her journal in tiny print, likely written the night before their last recorded day. History is what we tell, consequence is what we live. There is no glamour in that sentence, no headline. Just a young scholar looking at the trees and recognizing that not everything wants to be witnessed. The story ends where it must, at the poles and cords set into the ground, the line between a world we're allowed to talk about and a world we aren't. Past that, the air changes, the rules change, the appetite of the forest changes, it remembers, and it keeps what it believes is already its own.